This episode is brought to you by La Quinta by Wyndham. Your work can take you all over the place, like Texas. You've never been, but it's going to be great because you're staying at La Quinta by Wyndham. Their free Bright Side breakfast will give you energy for the day ahead. And after, you can unwind using their free high-speed Wi-Fi. Tonight, La Quinta. Tomorrow, you shine. Book your stay today at lq.com.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about all the trouble a disgraced Philadelphia activist who lied about her race caused at a local therapy office, all the money coming from who knows where in Oregon's upcoming elections, and the latest audit looking into the results of a 7-year-old city ordinance mandating affordable housing in new builds. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are Willamette Week City Hall reporter Sophie Peel and our very own executive producer, John Notarianni. It's Friday, May 17th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the Friday News Roundup. Sophie, John, thanks for hanging out with us this morning.
Hey, Claudia.
Thanks for having me.
So for all of our new listeners, today is the day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. But before we get into it, I usually ask an opening question so people can get to know our guests a little better. And this week, my opening question is actually tied to this new monthly series we just started, Sophie, on the show, where people go on and give us a kind of guide to the neighborhood, recommendations, basically, where to go. So we just did one on Old Town Chinatown with the hilarious and lovely Portland Mercury Arts and Culture editor, Suzette Smith. And next week is Brian of Montevilla.
Brian of Montevilla, a.k.a. CityCast Director of Digital Strategy, Brian Vance.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You might have heard him once or twice on the show already if you're a regular listener. So this leads me to today's opening question. I'm curious what neighborhood you would choose to live in if you didn't live in the one that you do now.
I can go first on this. I live up in St. John's. As I've said many times on the show, I love St. John's very much. The neighborhood I have a crush on, though, actually probably isn't that flashy of a neighborhood, but it's Concordia.
Oh.
You know what I mean? It's sort of like Killingsworth area, which I just feel like that part of town is pretty central. There's a couple really nice places to go around there, That's where they've got a New Seasons. They've got that great little district where Wilder and Gabbiano's and all of that is in Concordia. But it also feels residential in a way that's super cute. And I think it strikes the right balance of being accessible to a lot of the city, but also a little bit out of the way as well. So that's sort of my
Is that where McMinimans?
And the Kennedy School is there. That's correct.
I was going to say, yep. John, I think you can't stay away from the Kennedy School.
So yeah, I think that's my favorite.
What about you, Sophie?
So I live in Slabtown, which I like a lot. I'm right off of 23rd, which also means I'm 3 blocks from my office, for better, for worse. I love how walkable it is. I also love the trees. And I mean, some of the homes are just ridiculously large and beautiful. But sometimes it feels a little inaccessible. I think I was between Irvington and South Tabor, but I think I'd have to go with South Tabor. One of my coworkers lives there. And the houses are a lot more modest than the ones right around Mount Tabor. And everyone just seems happy there. They're just walking their dogs and everything's shaded and everyone has beautiful gardens. And it's just very quaint. It does feel like sort of a world in of itself. So I think I'd choose South Tabor.
I almost chose Tabor, but I was afraid because their streets are so narrow. And I was like, this is where I die. I like to jog. I like to ride my bike. I have a little motorcycle. I'm short. I was just someone's going to kill me. But yeah, it's gorgeous. It's such a beautiful area. And you're next to Tabor. I mean, come on. Yeah, so I also live in St. John's. Surprise, everyone. That's where I live.
The big reveal. Yeah, we know, Claudia.
Big reveal. I like it here because I've always have, and it feels like a little town. But the one thing that I am sometimes bummed about living here, John, you might back me up on this, is we do feel a little cut off from transportation, from main arterial roads, So if I had to move, I would look at more centrally located neighborhoods just to cut down on my commute. And it's a tie between my old neighborhood, Overlook, which technically still north AF, but I really love living there and it's closer in. The other one is actually one that you mentioned, Sophie, and like could be a plot twist here. Irvington.
Irvington's cute.
I can't afford to live there, but let's talk about, central and easy to walk around. It's still the Northeast, but if you like get on your little tippy toes, you can see Southeast. Love that area. And there's so much canopy. It's just beautiful. And the roads are wider.
Yeah, it's great. I hung out at Irving Park over the weekend, and I was just like, what a great spot.
Yeah. Anyhow, well, thanks, you guys. John, did you have an update for us?
Yeah, I wanted to poke back on last week's Friday Roundup when we had Taylor Griggs on from the Portland Mercury, and we talked about TriMet. We talked about sort of some of the incidents that have happened on TriMet trains and buses in recent months, and just like the complexity of perception versus reality. Well, after the show, TriMet actually reached out to us and sent us a really thoughtful email, pointing out a number of things that are going on, that they are working to quadruple funding for safety and security, and that like calls for police service have actually dropped by 38% since 2023. But the one thing that they said, and I wanted to quote this, TriMet said, quote, "One assault or negative experience is one too many, and our hearts go out to the victims of the high-profile incidents mentioned during the segment. Indeed, if anyone is assaulted, we take it seriously. TriMet alone cannot solve the root causes of societal problems, but we are committed to diminishing bad behavior and holding people accountable." So thanks for reaching out, TriMet. And we'd love to have your general manager on the show at some point. Hit us up.
I just think it's a little dramatic of TriMet to be like, unfortunately, we can't solve all of society's ills. I'm like, no one ever asked you to. Like, that just seems so dramatic to me.
I just saw Sophie's face the entire time you were doing the update, and she was just like, I can't wait. I can't wait. Just so you know, TriMet, I'm so excited to speak with you. All right, on to the news of the week. Sophie, you're bringing in a story you reported on last week, a pretty awkward discovery at a Portland therapy clinic. You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
So there's a therapy clinic in Southeast Portland. They have 2 locations. It's called Full Spectrum Therapy. They have, on average, about 15 to 25 therapists. And they really specialize in serving clients that are in the LGBTQ plus community. And also over 90% of their clients are on Medicaid. So, typically low-income clients. And last August, the CEO of the company, his name is Sam Sky, he hired a woman to run HR and equity for the clinic called Raquel Saraswati. And she is a quote-unquote activist out of Philadelphia that earlier that year, so early 2023, was sort of outed by the organization that she worked for at the time in Philadelphia. It was a social justice organization and a fairly prominent one in the Philly area. A bunch of her colleagues and also members of the nonprofit alleged that she was actually a white woman. She had long claimed that she had a number of ethnic identities, including South Asian, Latino. And, she was also really vocal about being a Muslim woman. She was really vocal about being an out lesbian. And she had really risen sort of in prominent activist circles. She led marches. She had a big social media following. I mean, she was one of those activists that was just really well known in the Philly area. So the organization that she worked for at the time, they alleged that she was actually a white woman. They got in contact with her family. They traced her genealogy. They did a lot of research. And she ended up resigning from there because it really made the rounds. I mean, national media picked it up. Of course, right-wing media sort of had a heyday with it as well, which kind of fueled it. And then she sort of went incognito for a little while. And then we heard that she was actually hired at a therapy clinic in Portland. So she had been hired at Full Spectrum in August. When the therapist found out later that month, they just started quitting. They had talked to the CEO about it, the owner of Full Spectrum. They said, look, we're really uncomfortable with this. We don't feel like safe around her. We're worried about our clients' confidentiality too. And about a third of these therapists were also people of color too. And so they were especially uncomfortable with these allegations that she had faked being a person of color when she was actually a white woman. And so over the course of, I think it was 2.5, 3 months, over 12 of the Full Spectrum therapists quit. And it's also important to note that all of the therapists that work at Full Spectrum are also part of the LGBTQ plus community. And that's why they're at that clinic, because they specialize in serving clients that are going through some of the same things that they are. So it's just this total exodus of staff. yeah, so that's kind of the gist of the story. And Raquel, to my knowledge, is still there. When we published about a week and a half ago, Raquel was still employed there.
Oh my God. Okay, so I'm so confused why she's still there, because I assume so, because you didn't say in your story, and she resigned or she was fired. Does the Full Spectrum CEO, Sam Sky, still think this is a smear campaign? Because I know that that was a big pushback from him, and he didn't actually do a background check. I also read there was nobody else up for the job. Like she came in like as a recommendation through a mutual friend. And they didn't even open up the position.
Yep. So after the therapist found out, they called a meeting with Sam. I think it was in September, where they pretty much had him explain the hire-in process, because they had a lot of questions. They tried to be kind of non-confrontational. They just asked sort of open-ended questions about what was the process, how do you know her? So Sam had met Raquel through the chief operating officer at the time of Full Spectrum, who is no longer there. It's my understanding he was let go for reasons that are unclear to me.
Oh, wow.
And Sam, during that meeting with therapists, told them there was no competitive process. We trusted her. We had already worked with her, and she's a woman of color. So why would we need to open up this application to anyone else to white candidates if we already had a diverse candidate? And Sam, when we reached out to Sam and Raquel, I believe they shared a PR person in response to our questions, because while their responses had some slight differences, they were very much aligned, basically saying this is a smear campaign, this is Islamophobic, basically saying she's a persecuted woman. This is the exact same thing that happened to her in Philadelphia. How dare people question her identity? She doesn't need the answer to anything. Yeah, it was odd. I think one thing that I really don't understand, and all of that, because I think I talked to 10 therapists that quit when I was reporting this story. And I asked each of them, do you understand why Sam stood by this woman when his company was crumbling around him?
Yeah.
And I still don't know. No one understood it. Over half of his therapists quit. Sam had started this company from nothing. I mean, he started it in 2017, and he really grew it to be a fairly prominent, LGBTQ plus clinic in Portland, because there is sort of a desert of these clinics that really specialize in serving clients who are part of that community, and also who are on Medicaid, right? And so it's a total mystery to me.
Sophie, it's been proven. Her mom came out and said, no, yeah, she's white. I feel like, why would her mom lie? I don't understand how this is still being disputed. You're an investigative journalist. It's pretty easy to look up this kind of thing, who your parents are, their birth name, racial background. This is not something you could still just claim.
Yeah. She was born Rachel Seidel, Seidel.
Which is a German name.
The nonprofit that she worked for in Philly, did all the genealogy stuff. And they said, look, what we found is that she's a white woman. And then I think various news outlets followed it up. There was, I don't remember which outlet it was, but reported that they had talked to her mom, and her mom called her white as the driven snow.
And there's pictures of her as a child, totally white.
Right.
I felt like this story pulls me in a lot of different directions, right? Because there's just so many things at play here. There's the appropriation of racial identity. There's anti-Muslim bigotry. There's sort of the protection of LGBTQ trans people who are in therapeutic processes. But what I did, I actually went back to some of the reporting from Philly, and especially a story from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Masra Mikati, who I thought did a really good job of framing this in terms of trust, right? And the trust that she had built up in the community in Philadelphia, and these sort of deep confidences that she had built among other activists, among other people on shared identities. Just the sense of betrayal that a lot of people in that immediate community have. And I think that feels especially important here, because we're talking about, again, therapy for trans and non-binary clients, which is already something that is very, very rare. There is not a lot of opportunities for that in the Portland area. And people who are coming into therapy from that sort of place needs such a space of trust, And I'm just thinking about the clients, the people who are in therapy, who are dealing with coming into this very, very vulnerable space and then having this sort of scandal sitting on top of them. I think that is the biggest tragedy in this whole situation.
Yeah. I think what upset me most about this story it wasn't what Raquel necessarily was claiming or wasn't claiming. It was the fact that this therapy clinic was crumbling.
Yeah.
And dozens of clients had to figure out a new therapist that they didn't know, that they hadn't built trust with, that didn't know their backstory.
Exactly.
And yet Raquel and Sam were still like, no, we're the victims. That's the part that just really, like, really bugged me. It's like, how self-centered do you have to be? Like, even let's say these allegations were totally false. I honestly think the right thing for Raquel to do would be like, look, I don't agree with these allegations. However, for the greater good of this community that I aim to serve, I'm going to step down because this is harming them. But there was absolutely none of it. I think that's like what matters most about this.
Yeah, I don't know. So what do you think? They're just going to ride it till they have no one left and Full Spectrum just crashes to the ground? I mean,
well, I'm really curious. You know, I think with a lot of news stories, like the current therapist at Full Spectrum will see this story. Maybe some of them will quit. But then in 2 weeks' time, right? Like everyone's going to forget about it and they're going to get new therapists and they might not know. And so
that's so creepy.
I mean, part of me really hopes this doesn't affect Full Spectrum because I think it's a clinic that serves a very delicate population and is needed. And at the same time, it does feel icky that she gets to stay there and sort of like shrouded by this like owner that is protecting her, you know, is like dying on this hill for her.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, Sophie, thanks so much for just doing a deep dive on this one and making everyone absolutely outraged. And it's unfortunate that nothing happened. I thought like once your story came out, I'd be like, and then I would find out she's fired or let go. And it's just like, no, they're just doubling down.
Yeah, no, they're digging their heels in. Yeah.
Oh, man. All right. Well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, more headlines of the week.
If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
If you're unaware, T-Mobile calls themselves the Un-carrier, which is fitting, considering they've just unraveled their price lock guarantee for new customers. If you ask me, that's pretty uncool. If you're uncomfortable with a company that says one thing but does another, then stick with Xfinity, whose whole home Wi-Fi, wired internet, service, speed, and reliability are unparalleled. Avoid the Un-carrier. Stick with Xfinity. Effective for new customers after 1/17/24. T-Mobile's price lock will only reimburse your last bill if you terminate service due to a price increase.
All right, John, what are you looking at this week?
Yeah, I am looking at the primary election coming up in just a few days and some of the issues that are at hand there. For this, I'm leaning on a lot of great reporting from Sammy Edge at The Oregonian, as well as Ryan Grimm from The Intercept. And Sophie will probably get into a little bit of your reporting as well, because there's a couple races that are coming up, congressional races. And it's a really big deal right now because there's a huge surge of money coming through in some of these races. I really started looking into what's going on in the 3rd congressional district. That is a lot of Portland, all the way out east to Mount Hood. It's Earl Blumenauer's district. I'd say the people who are leading are Sushila Jayapal, a former Multnomah County commissioner, and then Maxine Dexter, a doctor and a state representative. Well, back in January, Dexter had the least amount of fundraising in the whole race, but Dexter reported raising about $580,000 in April. That's compared to $160,000 by Jayapal and $112,000 by another competitor, Eddie Morales. But a lot of this money has come through what's called the 314 Action Fund. This is a group that supports Democrats with a background in science. And as of this past week, they'd put $1.6 million into supporting Dexter. And this is raising a lot of eyebrows, especially because The Intercept is reporting that this money is actually being driven by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. So there's this question of wait, this group with interests of an outside country is trying to influence what's going on in our congressional elections. And the way that disclosures work, we're not even going to get disclosures of who's funding these campaigns until the day before the election deadline. So Yeah, it's just sort of the exact picture of what is screwed up about like federal elections funding in America.
Yeah, well, could we say the quiet part out loud? Like why Jayapal would be, campaigned against?
Well, I mean, I think that if this is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, Jayapal there's a lot of concerns about her stance on Gaza. Her sister is the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus who's, called for a ceasefire in the current war in Gaza. So like the speculation by some folks is that this is very directly related to the war in Gaza and what certain groups think members of Congress are going to stand for or against. There's also speculation of Republican meddling, that this is like some Republican endgame to influence the race. I'm not seeing as much direct evidence for that, but that is what some people are saying as well.
Well, Sophie, what do you think?
Yeah, and Sophie, like this group, 314 Action Fund, has also been sticking his fingers into a district that you were looking into as well, right?
Yes, so very, very, sorry, that expression.
Oh my God. Are you laughing because John said sticking his fingers into...
Yes, of course I'm laughing because of that. I'm 12.
Okay, I'll rephrase it. And Sophie, this is also another group that has been meddling in another district that you're looking into. Does that work for you, Sophie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Really trying to think about something else. So more recently, 314 Action Fund has started to influence or try to influence the 5th Congressional District as well. So that's a very heated race between Representative Janelle Bynum, who currently represents Portland in the Oregon legislature, and then a Terrebonne-based engineer named Jamie McLeod Skinner. This is her 3rd time running for office, unsuccessfully. And so 314 Action Fund just this past week spent $473,000 to prop up Bynum's campaign. And then Mainstream Democrats PAC, which is also another fairly large national PAC, they've spent about $340,000 to support Bynum and another $340,000 to oppose McLeod Skinner. So, it's not quite as much money as what's happening in the 3rd Congressional District, but it's sort of the same players who are, seeking to sort of influence the 5th Congressional District.
Yeah. I'm curious if we're talking about this like dark horse, this like, what was it? The one that might be connected to Israel? Like, why would they be propping up Bynum?
I don't think and I could be wrong, but I don't think McLeod Skinner has asked for a ceasefire. I don't think she's gone as far as Sushila Jayapal. However, I think, but Bynum is a very moderate Democrat. She's very business friendly. She is sort of your quote unquote old fashioned Democrat in a way. She's just a lot more moderate than McLeod Skinner. So I would imagine that the 314 Fund is thinking through like, look, we want as much inertia behind kind of moderate people who might support continued aid, to Israel. And I think if you were to place a bet on that, I think Bynum would probably go further than McLeod Skinner.
I guess my big pull out question. See, now I'm sorry.
We're on a roll.
God damn it. I guess my big picture question is this election season any different from any others in the past? Like, I feel like outside interests have always tried to buy elections. I'm not saying I agree with it or like we should just be like, whatever. I'm just pointing out that it's part of American politics. So like, what's so different in this election cycle in our Oregon races than it has been before? Because I feel like we're getting a lot more coverage. Is it because it might be Israel? Because I feel like it's always some PAC is always just like, and they're controlled by, So I'm curious.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Claudia. I think this is not abnormal for there to be a flood of big money in the weeks leading up to the election. That's just how it works. I think what makes this one different is that we're talking about a war that we are participating in to an extent. And, that just ups the ante in some ways. It just ups the emotional charge. It ups the stakes. I think war is just like unlike any other, policy or issue. It just, it's a lot of human life involved. And I think that is why this outside spending feels just kind of weightier than previous outside spending.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, John, thank you so much for bringing that story with us. And Sophie, thanks for your continued work in that area, just making sure, keeping track of that money. So what I'm looking into this week is a new city audit that just dropped. This time they're looking at the city's inclusionary housing program that kicked off in 2017. Now that's the ordinance that requires new builds in the Portland area to have a certain percentage of units be affordable housing or pay a fee. And I looked at articles by Shane Dixon Kavanaugh of The Oregonian and Alex Zielinski at OPB. I also just read the audit because both articles said stuff that was just different from each other, just like enough where I was like, I had more questions. And I was like, I'm just going to the source. As we know, the city auditor's office has been on a roll. They're pretty much like the Kendrick Lamar of our city's government, just dropping one sick diss track after another.
God, Claudia.
So many letters of education. What, John? Am I wrong?
No, you're totally right.
Every week.
It's a very silly and very good analogy. I will refrain from interrupting.
It is their job.
Yeah.
And I love Kendrick Lamar. So I have nothing but love here for Simone Reed and her crew. Please don't audit me. Okay, so before I share some of the report findings, do y'all remember what the inclusionary housing program even is?
I can sort of shoot from the hip on it. I mean, basically,
I'll just tell you if you're wrong. I'll just be like,
okay, yeah, just tell me. Just give me the buzzer if I'm wrong. Basically, we need to have more housing. It's hard to make affordable housing because it's expensive to build. So the city put in these laws where developers can get certain incentives if they make a certain number of housing units in new developments meet like affordability thresholds.
Yeah. Well, so they decided in 2017 that the city needs a minimum of 23,000 additional housing units to serve like low and moderate income households. In this 7-year run, the program has created 566 affordable units. There's another 1,157 units in the pipeline. This is part of the audit, by the way. I didn't just know this number. So we're still a bit off from the 23,000 mark. And at this rate, it's going to take about 100 years to reach that goal. I did the sad math.
That's not funny, but that's funny.
It's so funny. I'm sorry. Anyhow, the program requires that all buildings proposing 20 or more units provide a percentage of that unit. So like if your family is making 80% or less of the median family income, then they're able to rent some of these, low income units. There's a lot of stuff happening where they're just like, if you don't do this, you could do this. And if you don't want to do any of this, just pay like $23 or $25 per square foot and we'll put that money in our affordable housing. I'm doing little quotes here, affordable housing unit money fund. And we'll just use that to then pay to create more housing since you don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. So before I get into these audit findings, what do you guys think so far?
Our auditor has done a very good job. Like, she has been a total bulldog.
Simone?
Yes. I mean, I've only been at Willamette Week for 3 years, but our previous auditor was not as much of a bulldog as Simone is. Like, she's really tearing some shit up, which I think is awesome because I think the auditor's office has long been sort of a softball. It's really unclear to me, like, how they choose what to audit. But I think she's going for the meaty stuff. And I think that's awesome.
So let me tell you a little bit of what the audit found, because the audit didn't find that the inclusionary housing program had effective performance tools to measure success or accurate data to reflect if it even was working. In addition, this is a direct quote of the audit. The goals were not specific to the program or realistic, which damn. And here's why. I didn't quite get it. It didn't click till midway of the audit, reading and being like, oh yeah, so this is what the program's doing. You guys, it's not counting how many people are getting housed. It's counting how many units are being made. Mm-hmm. The other thing that it said is like, hey, we found that most of these affordable units are routinely vacant or had high vacancy rates because there's not much marketing by the managers. It's almost like they didn't care if they were rented out, which is weird, huh? That's weird. The audit notes that the program has helped produce affordable housing, but it is not for those facing the greatest disparities because since the program was initiated 7 years ago, the economic disparities have widened. Mm-hmm. Also, most of the affordable housing that these builders are doing is like 1-bedroom or studio units. Mm-hmm. And those units are usually already kind of affordable and they're trying to house families here. So you can't shove a 4-member family into a studio or a 1-bedroom. So they're just like, well, there's not enough units for the people that were actually trying to get in here. Also, the audit dinged the Bureau for not providing property owners the information and the tools needed to find qualified tenants, to continue the program, and all the fees that the builders collected, all the ones that just didn't want to comply to this. The Bureau will have raked in more than $7 million by 2025, and all of this is supposed to fund more affordable housing. But according to the Bureau, as of June of last year, this had not yet happened. Pretty much all that fee money has gone back to just operating costs to the program.
I think that sort of hit on, not that the other parts of the audit aren't important, but I think that really hit on like government waste of, you know, the Housing Bureau collected money that was supposed to go towards affordable housing, and instead it went to like administrative costs. This to me feels like a very like Portland trend that we have really good ideas that are well-meaning, and then we just totally drop the ball when it comes to like follow through and accountability. And I think this goes for both the city and the county of, we're a big idea city. And I think like if you talk to old Portlanders, they always say, we are the city of ideas. You know, we were like the gem of the New York Times because we had such like bold, big ideas. And I think this is one of them. And yet, after we have that idea, there's just very little follow through. And I feel like this is just a good example of like that.
Yeah. Also, there's not even a compliance wing. So the audit dropped, and the Bureau of Housing and Commissioner Rubio pretty much penned a response, because that is the bureau that Commissioner oversees.
Yeah, I mean, basically, they said that, like, okay, like, you can sort of criticize this for not helping the poorest renters in Portland, but, like, that's not the point of this program, that there are other programs at the city that are designed to help super low-income renters. And also, you mentioned that there was this whole thing about, like, marketing the units. They basically said, like, look, it's also not the city's job to help the developers advertise these affordable apartments. The auditor's office wasn't super thrilled with that response, and they basically said that the response from Rubio and the city's housing bureau director, they said that these things didn't really even address the issues in the audit and could continue steering the program in the wrong direction. So this is one point where it feels like the people leading the bureau and the city auditor are sort of talking past each other.
Yeah. And you know who wins here? No one. So
No one, yeah.
Before I wrap up, does anyone have any last words, Sophie?
Just on the same topic, I just feel like our local elected officials are like allergic to accountability, even though it's like one of their top 5 words. Like if you did that thing where it's like, Cole, my top 5 words, and then it makes like a collage out of them, accountability would be one of them for like both our county commission and our city council. And yet we see this sort of thing time and time again. And it's like, it's great if we make more housing, but if we're not putting people in that housing, that's the whole freaking point.
Exactly. And then it always comes back with like, well, that wasn't the point of the program. Then what the fucking point was the program then? I'm sorry.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, John, Sophie, thanks so much for hanging out with me this morning, going through some of the stories of this week. I've been gone for a week or so. And so this is my first Friday roundup in a little bit. And I'm just so glad it was you, Sophie.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Claudia.
That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. Our executive producer is John Notarianni. Our producers this week are Julia Fiaioni, Natalie Rivera, and Noah Snyderman. Our newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, and our host is me, Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.